Hey gang, and welcome back. These videos are brought to you by Card Conduit, the best place to sell your unused collection fast and easily. 401 Games, Canada's top shop for all your hobby and TCG needs. Dragon Shield, the strongest sleeves for your strongest decks. And Moxfield, the easiest way to store and share your deck lists. I win the die roll, but Miguel has a pre-game effect by putting out his leyline, and we then move to my first turn, and I draw for turn. I play a Riverglide Pathway, and then tap it for a blue to cast Ruin Crab. Zach just plays a Snow-Covered Plains. Miguel's turn has him drawing and playing a tap Cinder Glade. Dom has a Mana Confluence and taps it, losing 1 to cast an Impulsive Pilferer. I've got a Forest Return, which has each opponent milling 3. I then pay 2 for Nexos and pass. Zach draws, plays a Snow-Covered Plains, and passes. Miguel just has a land for turn with a Carplusian Forest before he passes to Dom. Dom's got a Swamp, and pays 2 for an Ichor Wellspring, drawing as it enters. He then goes to combat, and hits Zach for 1 with a Pilferer. My land for turn is a Storm-Carved Coast, milling my opponents for 3 again. I then pay 3 mana, casting a Tireless Provisioner, and passing after that. Zach once more has the Snow-Covered Plains, but this time has something to do with it, casting a Scrapyard Recombiner. It comes in with 2+1/+1 counters, and he passes. Miguel has an Exotic Orchard for turn, and then brings out Bello. With Bello out, his leyline becomes a creature, which he swings at Zach for 4. With it connecting, Miguel gets to draw a card, and he passes for turn after that. Dom plays a Swamp, and then brings out Evereth in his main phase. He then sacrifices the Pilferer, which gets him a treasure token, and he gives her a +1/+1 counter. He then sacrifices the Wellspring, drawing a card as it hits the graveyard, and adding another counter to his commander. My turn has me first playing out a Tunneling Geopede, before I play my land for turn. It's a Steam Vents, which I have come in tapped, and I deal 1 to my opponents from the Geopede, mill them for 3 with the Crab, and make a treasure token from the Provisioner. I pass once all that's done. Zach misses his land drop, but does cast his trusty Pack Beast. It comes in and returns a Sol Ring to his hand, which I'd kindly milled for him, and Zach then passes turn. Miguel's got a Mountain, and he casts Garruk's Uprising. He draws as it enters as he controls a creature with 4 power, and then moves to combat, hitting Zach again and drawing yet another card. Miguel then has to discard down to hand size, putting Lotus Cobra to the graveyard. Dom plays an Ancient Tomb as his land for turn, and he takes 2 as he taps it to help cast Ophiomancer. He then decides to become the enemy of the table, losing 1 to the Mana Confluence, as he uses it to cast Chains of Mephistopheles. He then ships it after that. I've got a tapped Mystic Sanctuary coming in, dealing 1 to my opponents, milling them again for 3, and making another treasure token. I then tap enough for Magus Lucea Kane, and then going to combat, put her +1/+1 counter trigger onto herself. During my end step, Zach sacrifices the Recombiner, going to tutor for a Scrap Trawler, and putting it to hand. Zach's turn has him casting Sol Ring, and then tapping the rest of his mana for Teshar. He then casts a Mox Amber for turn, which triggers Teshar and brings back his Archivist of Ogma. Zach passes after that. Miguel untaps, and casts Eidolon of Blossoms in his main phase, which is funky with the chains out. This has him discarding first, and then drawing, and then does it again from the second draw from the Uprising, discarding first and drawing again. Going to combat, both the Eidolon and Leyline go at Dom. Dom thinks about blocking with one of the Snake tokens, but realizes they have Trample, so he just takes the 8. This has Miguel discarding, then drawing again from Bello's ability twice. Surprisingly, he hasn't drawn a land for turn, and has to pass after that. Dom plays an Exotic Orchard for turn, and goes to combat. He hits Miguel for 1 with the Snake token, and then casts a Marionette Apprentice, making a servo as it comes in with the Fabricate trigger. Dom then sacrifices the Snake token to Evereth, which has the Apprentice dealing 1 to each of his opponents. He passes after that. I draw and tap Magus Lucea Kane, using the mana to help cast a Midgame Graph Mage. I then use its ability to pay the cost to untap with Lucea Kane, and she is tapped again for 2 more colorless and a second copy of her X-Spell copy trigger. With that floating mana and the extra abilities, and a treasure token, I cast Mockingbird, and have 1 come in as a copy of the Provisioner, and the 2 copies coming in as Eidolon of Blossoms, which I then resolve the ETB triggers by discarding first and then drawing afterwards. My land for turn is then a Polluted Delta, which makes me 2 more treasures, mills my opponent for 3, and deals 1 to them again. I then crack it, losing 1 life, and go to find a tapped Hedge Maze. Once more, my opponents mill 3, take 1, and I make 2 more treasure tokens, plus I get to surveil 1, and I decide to keep it on top. Zach also gets an Archivist of Ogma trigger, gaining 1 life, but then has to discard a card before he can draw from it. After that, I pass. Zach's turn has a High Market coming in, and he casts an Arkham's Astrolabe. With the Teshar trigger, he brings back the Restoration Specialist, and then discards and draws from the Astrolabe's draw trigger before passing to Miguel. Miguel still can't find a land for turn, but does tap enough for an Outpost Siege, naming Khans as it comes in. He gets to draw 2 cards from the Eidolon and the Uprising, and discards before drawing each of them. He also gains 1 life from the Leyline. Going to combat, the enchantments go at Zach this time. Zach blocks what he can, but still drops to 18. This gives Miguel a bunch of discard then draw triggers, which he resolves 1 at a time. He finally finds a land, and plays a tapped Copperline Gorge before passing to Dom. Dom draws and goes straight to combat, hitting me with his Snake token for 1. He then sacrifices it to his commander in his second main phase, pinging his opponents for 1 with the Apprentice. He then passes, and gets ready to make a new Snake token on my upkeep. I've got a Mountain for turn, making 2 treasures, milling my opponents for 3, and dealing 1 to each of them. Going to combat, I put a +1/+1 counter onto my Rune Crab, and swing my Flying Bird Eidolons at Zach. He blocks 1 with Teshar, but takes the hit for the rest. I pass after that. Zach recasts Teshar in his main phase, and then plays out a Mox Opal, getting his Teshar trigger to bring back the trusty Pack Beast. With it entering, he gets to return Mishra's Bauble to hand. Zach then casts it, and gets another Teshar trigger, once more bringing back the Restoration Specialist. Zach then cracks the Bauble for a delayed draw, and passes. Miguel exiles Shamanic Revelation to his Outpost trigger, and then plays a Gratuitous Violence in his main phase, doing the same thing as he has been, discarding then drawing twice, and then gaining 1 life. He then swings all out at Dom. Dom blocks with everything, and before damage, casts Not Dead After All, targeting Evereth. With Evereth going to the graveyard, he then pays 2 mana for her trigger, and deals 6 to each opponent, and Evereth then comes back. Miguel then gets to resolve all of his draws, and then puts to stack a Blasphemous Act to wipe the board. It resolves, and with Everest hitting the bin again, Dom pays for her ability, dealing another 1 to his opponents. We also lose a further 4 from the Marionette Apprentice, and Miguel passes. Dom's turn has him drawing, recasting Evereth, and once she's out, plays out Commander's Plate, and passes. My turn has me drawing, and recasting Magus Lucea Kane. Once more I go to combat, and I put the +1/+1 counter onto her, and then pass after that. Zach draws and casts a Mana Vault during his turn. He then plays out Scrap Trawler, and then a Mere Retriever. He's not done though, playing out Skrilev, Defector Might, and then ships the turn after that. Miguel's turn has him exiling a card to the Outpost Siege on his upkeep, and he realizes that the Eidolon of Blossoms should have been gone because it would have lost Indestructible, with Bello going back to the command zone after the Blasphemous Act. He plays a Mossfire Valley from exile, and then brings back out Bello, gaining 1. Miguel then swings 1 enchantment apiece at each of his opponents to try and take us all out. Zach and Dom can't stop enough because of trample, and get taken out, while I just decide to take the hit for 8. Miguel then passes turn. I draw, and basically have this turn to figure something out, and then tap enough mana to cast Finale of Revelation, putting 11 to the X, and using Magus Lucea Kane's ability to do so. This has me copying it because of her ability, and I get to draw 22 cards, and then untap 10 lands, floating 3 mana before the rest of the untaps. And I then use the floating mana, and tap a few lands to help cast Reshape the World. I tutor for a Valakut, but quickly realize I only have 6 mountains to go along with it. Sadly, this is only 18 damage total, which is not enough to take Miguel out. Having drawn absolutely nothing that would help me, I have nothing that I can do except for pass to Miguel, knowing that I'm done for. Miguel exiles a forest to his siege, then plays it for turn. He decides to go for broke, casting an Unnatural Growth, and drawing 2 cards. He also gains a life, and then goes to combat. This has him doubling his board's power and toughness, and swinging out at me to win the game. Game review time. This game was about 45 minutes long, and it was pretty sweet. I always love a game where everyone is able to cast their commander and actually use their commander to some effect, and that's exactly what happened in this game. Unfortunately for Zach, everyone knew that Teshar was a combo deck, so he got beaten down, and Dom didn't do himself any favors by playing Chains of Mistopheles. And I'd say that Bello was probably the card of the game since it enabled Miguel's deck to do so much so fast. This game also reminded me that I need to run a critical mass of mountains, or at the very least start putting more of those surveil lands in that have mountain types as well. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.